The silence under the Ozark stars was absolute, until a sound, faint at first, began to scrape beneath the wooden planks of Axeman's bridge. Then, a single dull impact against the Chevy's passenger side, a shock wave that vibrated through the glass, through their very bones. Some places are not merely locations. They are wounds in the landscape, sites where the air itself seems to remember what transpired. In the Ozark Hills outside Springfield, Missouri, such a place is whispered about. A decrepit wooden bridge, its iron rails eaten by rust, its timbers groaning, even without a burden. Locals called it Axeman's Bridge, and its name carried a weight heavier than any steel. On one particular night in 1953, a young couple sought refuge there. The Ozark Hills, sprawling across the rugged southern expanse of Missouri, presented a landscape of profound, deceptive beauty. During daylight hours, endless undulations of verdant forest stretched to the horizon, a tapestry woven from the deep greens of oak and hickory, interspersed with the lighter hues of dogwood and redbud. Sunlight, filtered through the dense canopy, dappled the forest floor, illuminating patches of wild ferns and the delicate blooms of woodland wildflowers. The air, crisp and clean, carried the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, mingled with the distant calls of unseen birds and the gentle murmur of creeks winding through hollows. It was a picture of serene, almost pastoral solitude, a place where the passage of time seemed to slow, where the rhythm of nature dictated all. Yet, as the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, this placid facade dissolved. The long, stretching shadows of the ancient trees began to creep, transforming familiar shapes into distorted, monstrous silhouettes. The once comforting sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, deepened, taking on an ominous resonance. The wind, no longer a gentle caress, whispered through the valleys with an almost vocal quality, carrying with it a chilling undertone. It was during these twilight hours, as the veil between the seen and the unseen thinned, that the land seemed to remember its darker past, and the hushed taillies carried on the evening breeze gained an unsettling weight. Within this landscape, where natural splendor and an encroaching sense of dread commingled, certain isolated places had long earned their sinister reputations. One such location, a forgotten blight on the land, lay hidden deep within the hills, accessible only by a network of increasingly overgrown dirt tracks that few dared to traverse after dark. This was the Albino Farm. Over the span of generations, the original name had faded into obscurity, replaced by a moniker whispered in lowered voices: the Albino Farm. What remained of the old homestead stood as a stark, skeletal testament to a history of abandonment and inexplicable decay. The once grand stone mansion, its foundations laid with sturdy native rock, was now a hollow, gaunt ruin. The indelible scars of a fire, whose origin remained shrouded in mystery and speculation, marred its every surface. The blaze, long extinguished, had swept through the edifice years ago, leaving gaping wounds where windows and doors once offered welcome. Charred timbers, blackened and brittle, jutted out like broken bones from the remaining walls, which themselves were crumbling, streaked with soot, and seemed to exhale the very stench of despair and forgotten tragedy. Rainwater and the relentless cycle of frost had relentlessly widened cracks in the stone, creating intricate weeping patterns that resembled ancient, unhealing scars etched upon the building's very soul. Inside, debris lay scattered, twisted metal, shattered glass, and the ghostly remnants of furniture reduced to ash, all blanketed by a thick layer of dust and spiderwebs, preserving the moment of its violent undoing. Adjacent to the husk of the main house, two towering silos stood sentinel, their cylindrical forms piercing the sky like hollow metallic throats. Their surfaces, once perhaps a uniform dull gray, were now encrusted with thick, flaky layers of rust, streaked by countless rainfalls into crimson tears that bled into the muted tones of the surrounding overgrowth. No grain had filled their cavernous interiors in living memory. Instead, they echoed with a constant mournful hum as the wind spiraled within their depths, creating strange, almost guttural sounds that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The air around them carried a distinct metallic tang, a cold, almost sterile aroma that belied the warmth of a summer evening. A short distance away, the remnants of a barn lay sprawling like a fallen, splintered beast, its roof long caved in, timbers shattered and askew, slowly sinking into the encroaching earth. Its remaining walls, leaning precariously at dangerous angles, served as a macabre canvas for an intricate, ever-expanding network of graffiti. This wasn't merely random vandalism. It was a testament to decades of youthful bravado and morbid fascination. Symbols of unknown origin were scratched alongside names and dates, some barely legible, others boldly etched. Most chillingly, crude, distorted drawings of eyes, hundreds of them, in varying sizes and styles, peered out from every weathered plank, creating the unnerving impression of being constantly observed. Interspersed among these were elongated, almost spectral figures, their limbs distorted, their features deliberately obscured, suggesting shadowy movements and phantom presences. Each new mark added another layer to the site's grim folklore, a collective expression of the dread the farm inspired, the children of Springfield, driven by a potent mix of adolescent bravado and the lure of the forbiddens, often subjected one another to the ultimate dare, to venture onto the Albino Farm after nightfall. The stories they brought back, though varying in specific detail, converged on a singular, chilling core. Many returned wide-eyed and trembling, their faces pale, recounting fleeting glimpses of pale, indistinct silhouettes moving soundlessly within the fractured frames of the mansion's broken windows. These shapes, often described as tall and gaunt, appeared to glide rather than walk, their forms too fluid, too ethereal, to be entirely human. Other children swore they heard faint, guttural murmurs carried on the wind from the hollow depths of the silos or the shadowy recesses of the collapsed barn. These were sounds that were neither distinctly animal nor fully human, a low, unsettling resonance that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the dilapidated structures. The term, albinos, was whispered, its meaning ambiguous. Were they spectral inhabitants, the restless dead of the mysterious fire, or perhaps reclusive, unseen individuals said to dwell in the dilapidated structures, hidden from the world? Whatever their nature, these supposed entities were perceived as a tangible, lurking menace, anchoring the farm in the collective consciousness as a boundary between the known and the terrifyingly unknown, a place where the ordinary rules of existence no longer applied. The experiences of those who dared to visit often left lasting psychological imprints, manifested in recurring nightmares, and a noticeable reluctance to speak openly about what they had witnessed, further cementing the farm's reputation as a place of profound dread. A short distance from the blighted, accursed grounds of Springlawn Farm, a narrow, often sluggish creek meandered through a deeper hollow, its waters occasionally swelling into a minor torrent after heavy rains. Spanning this modest waterway, connecting one stretch of winding, rutted dirt road to another, stood a wooden bridge. Its construction, a testament to age and neglect, appeared overtly precarious. The once sturdy iron rails intended to provide safety were now completely consumed by layers of flaky, reddish-brown rust, their original metallic sheen long lost to the corrosive embrace of time and moisture. The wooden planks forming the bridge's surface, bleached gray and splintered, creaked and groaned with a persistent, unnerving vocalization, even when no discernible weight pressed upon them. This was not the sound of a well-maintained structure. It was a constant, low lament, a symphony of decay carried by the slightest breeze. Sometimes the sounds were sharp, like the snapping of old bones underfoot. At other times, prolonged and sorrowful, a deep groaning that resonated long after one had passed. The air around the bridge often carried the distinct, heavy smell of damp earth, decaying wood, and the acrid tongue of rust, a primal scent that seemed to cling to the memory long after one had left its proximity. This bridge, much like the farm it implicitly guarded, had accumulated its own formidable history of misfortune and chilling incidents, solidifying its place in the region's litany of unsettling tales. Over the years, strange and disturbing events became irrevocably linked to its weathered timbers. Old county records, barely legible, spoke of farm wagons found toppled into the shallow creek below, their wooden frames shattered, contents scattered across the rocky bed. What made these incidents particularly unsettling was the unexplained absence of the horses or the drivers, leaving only the wreckage and a profound sense of unanswered questions. There were numerous reports of livestock, often sheep or young calves, discovered near the bridge with their throats savagely cut. The wounds were often described as unsettlingly precise yet brutally effective, leaving puddles of dark blood to seep into the surrounding earth, raising terrifying questions about the nature of the predator responsible, a predator unlike any known to local farmers. Local farmers, hardened by years of rural life and accustomed to the harsh realities of nature, recounted bizarre occurrences while traversing the bridge late at night. They spoke of instances where their trucks, perfectly maintained and robust, would inexplicably stall directly over the creek, their engines dying without warning, plunging the occupants into sudden darkness and an unnerving silence. The vehicles would often resist all attempts to restart, only to sputter back to life minutes later, without explanation, once they had been pushed off the span. During these inexplicable stalls, many drivers reported a chilling sensation of being utterly alone, yet simultaneously watched a palpable presence descending upon their vehicles. Some even swore they detected an acrid metallic smell in the air during these moments, reminiscent of blood, even when no visible source was present. More unsettling still were the recurring sightings. A figure, consistently described as tall and clad in a wide-brimmed hat, often reported standing motionless at one end of the bridge, always at the very edge of perception, a shadowy sentinel. This figure would vanish the moment one dared to focus, leaving behind only the cold night air and a gnawing sense of doubt and fear. The consistency of these reports, from various, unrelated witnesses over decades, deepened the mystery rather than clarified it. These accounts, repeated and embroidered over generations, solidified the bridge's ominous reputation. It was no longer just a crossing. It was Axeman's Bridge, a name spoken with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, a name that evoked images of unseen violence and lingering malevolence. The atmosphere surrounding both the Albino Farm and Axeman's Bridge was one of pervasive dread, a heavy, almost tangible blanket that settled upon the land as twilight bled into night. These were not merely abandoned sites. They were perceived as entities unto themselves, active participants in the grim folklore of the Ozarks. The wind rustling through the gnarled, ancient trees, the distant cries of unseen nocturnal animals, even the profound silence itself seemed imbued with a silent, primal warning. The air carried a quality of anticipation, a preternatural stillness, as if the very land held its breath, awaiting the next unfolding of its dark narrative. The year was 1953, and for some, life in Springfield, Missouri, presented a carefully circumscribed existence, particularly for its younger inhabitants. Social conventions held sway, dictating public conduct and private aspirations. Among the city's working population was Robert Miller, a man of 24 years, whose hands bore the unmistakable marks of his trade, stained with the indelible grime of grease and oil, calloused and strong from countless hours spent grappling with stubborn engines and rusted chassis in the dimly lit confines of a mechanic's garage. They were the hands of a man deeply familiar with the visceral realities of machinery. He possessed a demeanor often described as firm, an unyielding quality evident in his steady, direct gaze and the resolute set of his jaw, suggesting a man who knew his own mind and was not easily swayed by external pressures. His preferences, too, leaned towards the less traveled path. He held a discernible, almost visceral fondness for the isolated pockets of the Ozark Hills, places where the insistent hum of city life faded into a primal, ancient silence, offering both a challenge to his self-reliance and a refuge from the mundane dot in stark contrast. Yet inextricably linked to Robert by a quiet, burgeoning affection was Elaine Carter, a woman of 19. Her upbringing had been rooted deeply in the rich, fertile soil of a local farm, where the rhythms of agriculture and the strictures of tradition governed daily life. This environment had instilled in her the values of diligence, practicality, and an unwavering respect for the established order, values fiercely upheld by her conservative parents. Her movements often exhibited a practiced economy, a quiet grace born of routine and the demands of farm life. But beneath her outwardly composed exterior, a restless energy subtly stirred. She was a daughter bound by an intricate web of familial expectations, her life meticulously structured, yet within her, a nascent desire for personal freedom and unchaperoned intimacy began to bloom. It was a yearning for moments beyond the watchful, ever-present eyes of her home, a quiet, almost imperceptible rebellion against the suffocating embrace of parental control. The tension between the conservative framework of her upbringing and her own awakening desires created a subtle but palpable strain, a constant, low-frequency hum that shaped her every interaction. Particularly with Robert. Their relationship, though still in its nascent stages, was forged in the shared, urgent need for escape. The small, often crowded social spaces of Springfield, with their incessant gossip and public scrutiny, offered no sanctuary for their growing affection. Public displays of intimacy were not merely frowned upon. They were actively curtailed, and the omnipresent watchful eyes of neighbors, family members, and the community at large rendered any genuine privacy virtually impossible. Therefore, the search for a clandestine haven, a secluded spot where their affection could flourish unobserved, became a silent, unspoken pact between them. It was a driving force that inexorably led them away from the familiar, away from the well-trodden paths, and into the deepening, encompassing shadows of the Missouri countryside. It was a search that inevitably pulled them towards the more remote, less frequented locales, places that promised the precious commodity of isolation, but which, unbeknownst to them, exacted a far greater, more terrifying cost. On a particular evening, as the last vestiges of a warm spring daylight surrendered to the encroaching indigo of night, Robert guided his light blue 1953 Chevy Bel Air onto the gravel drive of Elaine's family farm. The car, a gleaming emblem of post-war prosperity and youthful aspiration, its sleek lines and polished chrome reflecting the fading light, stood out distinctly against the rustic backdrop of the weathered barn and the sturdy, unadorned silo. Its polished surfaces shimmered under the retreating light, mirroring the quiet anticipation that hung heavy in the cooling air. Elaine emerged from the farmhouse, her dress modest, carefully chosen to appear innocuous, her dark hair neatly tied back, a picture of dutiful conformity. Yet her eyes, usually downcast or demure, held a subtle spark of defiance, a barely perceptible urgency that betrayed her composed exterior. She moved with an almost practiced swiftness, her gaze sweeping the darkened windows of her home, a quiet, almost instinctive avoidance of any lingering glances from within. As she settled into the passenger seat, the supple leather creaked softly, a sound that seemed amplified in the gathering dusk, marking her silent departure from one world into another. Robert, his attention fixed on the road ahead, offered a brief, reassuring glance in her direction, his strong hand resting momentarily on the steering wheel, a small, shared gesture of understanding that transcended the need for spoken words. The journey began on familiar asphalt roads, the Chevy's powerful engine humming a steady, rhythmic tune, a comforting mechanical pulse that resonated through the car's frame. The last streetlights of Springfield quickly receded into the rearview mirror, their yellow glow swallowed by the lengthening shadows of rural fields and scattered, distant farmhouses. As they ventured deeper into the undulating landscape of the Ozarks, the familiar paved roads gradually gave way to narrower, less maintained routes, their surfaces growing coarser, until they dissolved entirely into stretches of loose gravel and packed dirt. The car's tires crunched and spat small stones against the undercarriage, a rhythmic percussion that punctuated the growing silence within the cabin. Robert handled the vehicle with a practiced ease, his firm, steady grip on the steering wheel, guiding the Bel Air confidently over the uneven terrain, navigating the dips and sudden turns of the winding country roads with an instinct born of extensive familiarity with these hidden, remote passages. He knew these parts of the Ozarks well. Their profound isolation, their wild, untamed nature, offered a strange, almost primal comfort to him. Elaine, in the passenger seat, leaned her head slightly against the cool glass of the window, her gaze drifting over the blur of rapidly receding trees and the deepening shadows that transformed the familiar landscape into an alien, nocturnal tableau. Her eyes occasionally flickered towards Robert, then quickly, almost furtively, back to the passing scenery, a cautious, almost instinctive dance that acknowledged their shared secret. The air within the car, initially thick with the unspoken tension of their clandestine departure, began to soften, replaced by a growing sense of complicity and shared adventure. The further they drove from the familiar constraints and watchful eyes of their daily lives, the more pronounced this quiet intimacy became. The interior of the Chevy, a small, brightly lit bubble of warmth and shared purpose, became a private world, a transient sanctuary against the vast, darkening expanse of the Ozark night. The car's radio, tuned to a local station, played a soft, melodic tune, its understated melody forming a low, unobtrusive backdrop to their silent communication. A quiet testament to their growing comfort with one another. As the Bel Air traversed the increasingly remote and challenging roads, the landscape underwent a profound transformation. The scattered, distant lights of isolated homes vanished entirely from view, leaving only the soft, ethereal silver glow of the rising moon and the faint, diffused shimmer of countless stars to provide any illumination through the dense, overarching canopy of trees that pressed in on either side of the narrow, winding track. The air grew perceptibly cooler, carrying with it the damp, earthy scent of the deep forest, an ancient, primeval aroma that spoke of untamed wilderness and timeless secrets. Robert slowed the car, the engine's purr deepening to a low rumble as the road beneath them became even rougher, marked by deeper ruts and larger, more frequent stones that rattled the suspension. The approaching structure, a dark, unmistakable silhouette against the moonlit sky, gradually, almost reluctantly, came into full view. It was Axeman's bridge. Its outline was unmistakable. The distinctive, weathered arch of its ancient wooden frame, the jagged, rust-encrusted iron railings that bordered its narrow span, all coalescing into a single, brooding silhouette that seemed to absorb the ambient light rather than reflect it. Even from a distance, the bridge exuded an aura of profound age and palpable neglect, a silent, stoic witness to countless passages and untold secrets. Robert guided the Bel Air with precise, deliberate movements, the vehicle's tires rolling onto the rough-hewn wooden planks with a low, resonant thud, a sound immediately followed by a series of protesting creaks and mournful groans that echoed faintly over the gentle, almost inaudible murmur of the creek flowing far below. He drove the car deliberately, not pausing at either end, but instead guiding it slowly, confidently, to the very center of the span. Here, poised directly over the slow-moving dark water, he brought the gleaming Bel Air to a complete, final stop. With a soft, almost imperceptible click, Robert turned the ignition key. The engine, which had been their constant, reassuring companion throughout the journey, coughed once, then fell into a profound, unnerving silence. The radio, too, went abruptly quiet, its soft melody abruptly cut off mid-note, leaving a lingering ghost of sound in the air. The sudden, absolute absence of mechanical noise was profound, an almost jarring transition from the familiar sounds of their journey to a pervasive, enveloping quiet. It was a silence so absolute, so heavy, that it seemed to press in on the car, on their very beings, broken only by the barely perceptible, subterranean current of the creek below and the occasional distant, plaintive cry of a nocturnal bird deep within the surrounding impenetrable woods. The air within the car, once warm with the hum of the engine, now grew distinctly cool, mirroring the crisp chill of the night outside. In the ensuing, almost reverent stillness, a deep sense of quiet intimacy settled over the young couple. Robert reached out and, with a deliberate motion, extinguished the headlights, plunging the interior of the car into a soft, almost dreamlike moonlit gloom. The only light now came from the countless, distant stars, pinpricks of icy fire in the vast expanse, and the pale, ethereal glow of the unseen moon, which cast long dancing shadows through the skeletal branches of the ancient trees lining the creek banks. Their figures, softened by the dim silver light, became less distinct, their contours blurring, almost merging into the embracing shadows that filled the car's interior. Elaine shifted slightly in her seat. The absolute silence that had enveloped Robert and Elaine within the Chevy Bel Air, a stillness once perceived as a comforting cloak of privacy, began to shift, subtly distorting its benign nature. A faint sound reached them from beneath the bridge, a soft, dragging scrape, a rhythmic shhk-hhk that seemed to emanate from the shadowed space where the creek's sluggish current met the moss-covered bank. The sound was low, almost submerged beneath the night's natural hum, yet it carried an undeniable presence, suggesting something moving slowly, deliberately, close to the water's edge in the impenetrable darkness below. It was heavier than a branch, too even for a stone shifting. Elaine's relaxed posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her fingers, still intertwined with Robert's, tightened in an involuntary squeeze of apprehension. Her head tilted slightly, her gaze fixed on the passenger side window, though only distant star reflections offered light. Robert, too, had heard it. His head turned slowly towards the passenger side, his posture becoming rigid, a focused intensity settling over his features as he strained to identify the source. The rhythmic scraping continued, growing subtly louder, drawing nearer, no longer a vague whisper, but a definite, slow, cumbersome progression. It was a sound that did not belong, a deliberate intrusion into the night's quietude, too heavy for small animals, too erratic for natural flow. It resonated with an eerie, unsettling sense of purpose. The dragging noise ceased abruptly, leaving a void of silence heavier, more ominous than before. For a brief, agonizing moment, only the faint, mournful creaking of the old bridge timbers, a lament rising from the wood itself, filled the void. The air in the car thickened with unspoken shared dread. Then a new sound, immediate and visceral, erupted. A dull, heavy thud reverberated with shocking force against the lateral panel of the Chevy Bel Air, a sickening, concussive impact against the driver's side door closest to Robert. The blow was considerable, strong enough to send a visible shudder through the entire car. The glass of the windows rattled violently, a sharp vibration penetrating their very bones. The impact was thick, fleshy, almost muffled, as if something substantial and dense had struck the steel with immense power. Elaine gasped, a sharp intake of breath, her body recoiling instinctively, pressing deeper into the seat. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on the shadowy driver's side, though darkness offered no visual confirmation. Robert, too, reacted with a sharp intake of breath. His hand, which had held Elaine's, withdrew abruptly, moving swiftly to his door handle. His body language shifted instantly from stillness to a taut, coiled readiness. His gaze, firm and resolute, met Elaine's briefly, a silent, urgent communication passing between them through the raw intensity of his eyes. He made a quick, decisive gesture towards her door handle, a sharp downward motion with his hand, clearly indicating that the door was to remain closed, secured, and untouched. His jaw was set, his expression unyielding, a testament to his known temperament. With a definitive click, the driver's side door handle engaged, and Robert pushed the heavy car door open with a swift motion. The interior light flickered on briefly, casting stark, fleeting shadows across the cabin before being immediately swallowed by the vast darkness outside. As he swung his legs out and stepped onto the weathered wooden planks of the bridge, the ancient timbers beneath his weight creaked and groaned with amplified protest. His footsteps, deliberate and heavy, moved away from the car, their rhythm fading quickly into the oppressive night. The car door swung shut with a soft, echoing thud, sealing Elaine inside, plunging her back into the profound moonlit gloom that now felt far more sinister, more isolating. The sound of the latch clicking into place resonated with terrifying finality. Elaine was left utterly alone, isolated within the confines of the Bel Air, the upholstered interior, moments ago a private sanctuary, now transformed into a claustrophobic, metallic cage. The car's windows, offering only distorted reflections and impenetrable shadows, became opaque barriers, severing her connection to Robert and the outside world. Yet unable to block out its escalating horrors, her body remained rigid, pressed deep into the passenger seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, fingers digging painfully into her palms. Her breathing became ragged, uneven, each inhale a sharp, almost painful gasp. She strained her ears, listening intently, desperate to discern any sound that might indicate Robert's presence, his location, his condition. The only immediate sounds were the persistent, mournful groaning of the bridge timbers and the frantic, deafening thumping of her own heart. A profound, suffocating silence descended once more. But this was no longer the peaceful, intimate quiet of before. It was a heavy, expectant silence, thick with menace, a predatory stillness that seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes, each one punctuated by Elaine's frantic pulse. She leaned forward slightly, ear pressed against the cool glass, trying desperately to pierce the veil of the profound night. She scanned the visible parts of the bridge, the dark, rust-eaten rails, the faint outline of the trees, but saw nothing beyond shifting shadows. Robert was nowhere in sight, his footsteps having vanished without a trace, leaving only an agonizing, terrifying uncertainty. Then, a new sound began, subtle at first, almost imperceptible over the blood rushing in her ears. It was a soft, muffled thump, originating from above, from the car's roof. Not a violent smash, but a dull, deliberate impact. A beat passed, then another identical thump, and then another. The thuds were not random. They were distinct, cadenced, and rhythmic, a slow, deliberate percussion against the metallic roof of the Chevy. Asterisk thump. Thump, thump. The sound resonated deeply through the car's metal frame, vibrating downwards, filling the confined space with a chilling, inescapable rhythm. It was a sound that suggested weight, a heavy, unhurried presence moving directly overhead. The metallic structure of the car amplified every impact, turning it into a resonant tremor. Elaine froze, her gaze darting frantically upwards, as if she could pierce the solid steel of the roof. The methodical thudding continued, ceaseless and unnervingly close, creating the terrifying sensation that something, or someone, was not merely above the car, but slowly, methodically, moving across its entire length. The sound implied intelligent, purposeful traversal, and unhurried exploration. It was too regular to be an animal, too heavy to be falling debris. It suggested an entity of significant size, perhaps pacing, observing, directly over her head. The rhythmic impacts seemed to echo the slow, dragging footsteps from beneath the bridge, but now the threat was immediately above, enclosing the vehicle from all sides. The muffled thuds became a sinister lullaby. Each beat a chilling count, the relentless thudding, a chilling, rhythmic pulse in the suffocating darkness, continued its slow, cadenced march across the car's roof. Each impact sent a fresh shiver down Elaine's spine, a visceral jolt of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She pressed herself even deeper into the seat, her muscles locked rigid, her breath catching in her throat, desperate to become as small and inconspicuous as possible. Her eyes darted wildly from the windshield to the side windows, searching frantically for any glimpse of movement. But the night offered only the impenetrable blackness of the Ozark woods, the distant, pale sheen of the moon, and the oppressive, all-encompassing, bone-rattling sound, despite the raw, primal terror that gripped her, a profound weariness, the culmination of a long day of strenuous farm work, emotional tension, and the sheer physical shock of the preceding events began to assert itself. Her eyelids grew heavy, a leaden weight pulling them downwards, a struggle against an invisible force. She fought against it, forcing them open with immense effort, her focus blurring. The rhythmic thudding on the roof, once a source of acute fear, began to take on a strange, almost hypnotic quality. It was a ceaseless, monotonous beat, a dark, primal lullaby in the terrifying night, a rhythm resonating deep within her exhausted body. Her head drooped forward, then snapped back up with a violent jolt, her body jerking awake. But the effort was immense, unsustainable. The fear, though still profoundly present, battled against a deeper, more primitive physiological urge. Her vision blurred, the contours of the car's interior softening into indistinct shapes. The rhythmic thudding continued, a constant, dull percussion that began to merge with the frantic, weakening beating of her own heart. Her head sagged forward once more, resting heavily against the cool fabric of the seat. Her breathing, still uneven, gradually deepened, evening out, becoming slow and heavy, almost a sigh of surrender. Her hands, still clasped, loosened their desperate grip. The oppressive quiet, broken only by the incessant thudding above and the occasional creak of the bridge, slowly drew her down, pulling her into a dark, unwilling oblivion. The sounds of the night, the distant calls, the creaking bridge, and the relentless, rhythmic thumps on the roof faded, receding into the farthest reaches of her consciousness. Elaine Carter, trapped within the silent confines of the Chevy Bel Air, succumbed to the overwhelming weight of exhaustion, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep, leaving the car, herself, and the vanished Robert to the mercy of whatever moved outside in the profound, consuming darkness of Axeman's bridge. The moon, now high overhead, cast its pale, indifferent light upon the motionless car, a silent witness to the unseen terror that had descended. The profound, dreamless sleep into which Elaine Carter had fallen, a final desperate surrender to exhaustion and terror, was not broken by the gentle caress of a new dawn, but by an abrupt, jarring assault of light and sound. Sharp, insistent beams of light, like luminous spears, repeatedly struck the passenger window of the Chevy Bel Air, cutting through the residual, heavy gloom of the car's interior. These blinding flashes were accompanied by loud, authoritative voices calling out her name, muffled and indistinct at first, then growing clearer, resonating with an urgent, commanding tone that pierced the haze of her exhaustion and disoriented mind. The rhythmic thudding on the roof, the haunting creaks of the bridge timbers, the distant, unsettling sounds of the night, all the terrifying acoustic intrusions had abruptly ceased. Replaced by the stark, disorienting reality of morning. Her eyelids fluttered open, struggling against the harsh intrusion, her vision blurring as she slowly registered the shapes and movements outside the glass. Figures in dark, official-looking uniforms moved with a sense of methodical purpose around the car, their faces obscured by the harsh, sweeping glow of their flashlights, which continued to cut through the misty morning air, illuminating patches of condensation that clung to the windows. A hand, heavy and firm, rapped sharply against her window, a sound that reverberated with a shocking intensity through the now silent cabin. Another voice, deep and commanding, was directed specifically at her, its tone urgent and unyielding. "Miss? Miss, are you all right in there? Can you hear me?" The palpable urgency in their voices, the relentless light, stripped away any lingering fragments of sleep, replacing them with a cold, creeping sense of dread. The driver's side door, which Robert had closed the night before, was now ajar, revealing the muted, silvery gray light of dawn breaking over the eastern horizon. A tall, uniformed officer, his broad silhouette framed against the brightening sky, reached into the vehicle and unlatched Elaine's door. The cool, crisp morning air, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil, decaying leaves, and the metallic tongue of rust from the bridge, flowed into the car, a stark, unwelcome contrast to the oppressive warmth of the night's confinement. The officer's face, partially illuminated by the beam of his flashlight, was etched with a grim concern, his eyes scanning her with a practiced, assessing gaze. He spoke directly, his voice firm but steady, his words cutting through her confusion. "Ma'am, please step out slowly. We need to get you out of here, away from the vehicle." Elaine, her body stiff and protesting from the long night spent in a cramped, unnatural position, moved mechanically, her limbs feeling heavy and unresponsive, as if disconnected from her will. She pushed herself upright, her gaze still unfocused, her mind struggling to comprehend the sudden shift in reality, and slowly swung her legs out of the car. As her feet touched the rough, splintered planks of the bridge, another officer, younger and with a more anxious expression, his face pale in the developing light, approached. He took her arm gently but firmly, his grip surprisingly strong, guiding her away from the vehicle. "Just keep looking forward, Mom," he instructed, his voice low but insistent, almost a desperate plea. "Don't look back. Just keep looking straight ahead." The directive was clear, delivered with an almost desperate urgency, as if the very act of looking behind her held a terrible, irrevocable danger, a sight no civilian should witness. Yet, as the officer attempted to steer her away from the scene, a powerful, irresistible instinct asserted itself within Elaine. It was an urge that defied the officer's stern warning, a primal, unyielding need to understand, to see, to confront the horror that had consumed the night and its companion. Her head, heavy and unwilling at first, slowly, inexorably, began to turn, a slow, deliberate movement that defied the physical pull of the officer's hand. Her gaze drifted past the open door of the Bel Air, past the officer's shoulder, past the shimmering chrome of the car, towards the area where Robert had last been seen, where the relentless thudding had echoed from above her eyes. Still struggling to fully adjust to the dim, growing light of the morning, widened in a silent, profound horror. Above the car, suspended from a thick, gnarled branch of an ancient oak tree that overhung the creek bank like a skeletal arm, Robert Miller hung. A coarse, dark rope, twisted and taut, was cinched cruelly around his neck, disappearing into the dense, dark foliage above. His body, unnaturally elongated and disturbingly still, swayed slowly and almost imperceptibly in the gentle morning breeze, a grotesque, silent pendulum against the pale, pre-dawn sky. His bare feet, still and lifeless, hung just inches above the dusty, metallic roof of the Chevy Bel Air, where Elaine had been sleeping only moments before. A dark, viscous fluid, unmistakably blood, seeped steadily from his upper body, staining his torn shirt a deeper, gruesome crimson and dripping in slow, measured drops onto the dusty, metallic surface of the car below. Each drop created a small, dark blossom on the light blue paint, expanding slowly, irrevocably. The sight was a brutal, visceral punctuation, marked to the terror of the preceding night. An image burned into her mind with searing clarity. The swaying body, the dark stains spreading, the unsettling stillness of his form. A horrifying inversion of life. She stood utterly frozen, rooted to the spot, the officer's firm grip on her arm, the only tenuous tether to a fading reality, her eyes fixed on the horrific tableau, unable to tear away. The chilling silence of the other officers, their averted gazes, their rigid postures, spoke volumes. Confirming the unspeakable horror that had unfolded, the discovery immediately transformed Axeman's bridge from a mere rural crossing into a bustling scene of intense, methodical investigation. Sirens, distant at first, then growing louder, their wails echoing through the Ozark hollows, cut through the morning air, signaling the rapid arrival of more emergency personnel and law enforcement. Uniformed officers fanned out, their movements precise and practiced, meticulously cordoning off the entire area with bright yellow tape, creating a stark, unsettling boundary between the ordinary world and the site of an unspeakable horror. Detectives, their faces grim, unreadable masks of professional detachment, arrived shortly after, their gazes sweeping over the scene with a practiced, dispassionate efficiency, cataloging every detail, every fallen leaf, every displaced stone. The process of documenting, photographing, and carefully recovering Robert Miller's body was slow, methodical, and profoundly grim. Each deliberate movement by the officers, each sharp flash of a camera, each whispered instruction seemed to underscore the profound tragedy that had unfolded under the indifferent gaze of the Ozark night. The air grew heavy, not only with the lingering scent of damp earth and rust, but also with a new metallic tang, barely perceptible, but unnerving, a ghost of the blood that had been shed. Forensic technicians meticulously combed the area, collecting samples of soil, fibers, and any aberrant organic matter, working with quiet, concentrated urgency as the morning mist slowly lifted. The subsequent medical examination, performed by the esteemed county medical examiner, Dr. Arthur Jenkins, was intended to bring clarity, to provide a definitive scientific answer to the brutal question of how Robert Miller had died. Dr. Jenkins, a man whose long career had exposed him to the grim realities of countless deaths, approached the case with his usual meticulous attention to detail. Instead, the official report, compiled after days of painstaking forensic analysis in the sterile quiet of the morgue, served only to deepen the mystery, transforming a tragic incident into an utterly inexplicable enigma. Dr. Jenkins's external examination revealed a series of deeply disturbing and unusual wounds. Robert's body presented multiple perforations and extensive lacerations across the cervical region of his neck and the upper portion of his thorax. These were not clean cuts, nor were they typical stab wounds inflicted by a conventional blade. The characteristics of the injuries pointed distinctly to a force cortanti irregular, an irregular cutting or tearing force. The tissue damage suggested a brutal, rending action, as if claws had scratched and pierced the skin with immense, uncontrolled power. The wounds varied significantly in depth and length, some appearing as shallow, jagged tears, others as deeper, piercing punctures that penetrated muscle and tissue. Forensic analysis further noted distinct longitudinal grooves and striations embedded within and around the lacerations, patterns that suggested a repeated raking or dragging motion, as if multiple sharp, pointed instruments had been dragged across the flesh numerous times, leaving deep, parallel furrows. The edges of the wounds were consistently ragged, brutally torn rather than cleanly sliced, a characteristic highly inconsistent with any known metallic weapon. Even more unsettling were specific impressions found at the base of the cranium and along the lateral aspects of the neck. These were distinct semicircular impressions, deeply embedded in the flesh, strongly reminiscent of a bite. The patterns suggested extreme pressure and a series of pointed indentations arranged in an arc. However, when careful molds were taken and precise measurements of the impressions and their spacing were conducted, the interdental spacing, the exact distance and alignment between the impressions did not correspond to any known or catalogued species. It was unequivocally not human. It did not match canine dental patterns, nor those of any wild animals indigenous to the Ozarks, such as bears, mountain lions, coyotes, or even large predatory birds. The unique shape and distribution of the impressions utterly defied classification, falling outside the established parameters of any biological dentition they had on record, or indeed any they had ever encountered in their extensive experience. The wounds spoke of an unknown assailant, a biological anomaly. The internal examination further complicated matters, revealing trauma consistent with strangulation. But even this finding did not clarify the full extent of the horror. The profound external injuries, particularly the unclassifiable bite marks and the nature of the lacerations, indicated a primary, devastating attack that preceded the eventual strangulation. The official conclusion, meticulously typed onto the final report, destined for the county archives, was stark in its brevity and chilling in its implications. The evidence is inconsistent. A definitive cause of death could not be established. This laconic statement, issued by the highest medical authority in the county, sealed Robert Miller's death in a shroud of professional bafflement and public bewilderment. It was an admission of defeat by science, an acknowledgement that whatever entity had ended Robert Miller's life on Axeman's Bridge defied rational explanation and left no identifiable trace in the annals of forensic pathology. The report, instead of providing answers, left only a profound, disturbing sense of inconclusion, reinforcing the inexplicable and terrifying nature of the event. The horrifying events of that spring night in 1953, culminating in the inexplicable death of Robert Miller and the profound trauma inflicted upon Elaine Carter, did not, as might be expected, lead to a comforting resolution of the grim reputation of Axeman's Bridge. Instead, the incident became another indelible layer in the dark tapestry of the bridge's existing folklore, intertwining itself inextricably with the older tales of strange accidents and unseen presences. The county medical examiner's laconic conclusion, asserting with stark brevity that the evidence is inconsistent, a definitive cause of death could not be established, resonated far beyond the sterile confines of the official report. It was more than a mere admission of scientific defeat. It was a chilling, public acknowledgement that certain horrors defied rational explanation, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a profound, pervasive sense of unease that settled over the entire community. For the people of the Ozarks, this scientific ambiguity did not diminish the terror. On the contrary, it merely confirmed their long-held, unsettling belief that Axeman's Bridge was a place truly touched by something profoundly unnatural, a veritable locus of inexplicable malevolence. The tragedy of Robert and Elaine, with its spectral thudding on a car roof and the grotesque discovery at dawn, ceased to be just a remembered incident. It transformed, over the subsequent years, into a cautionary legend, a grim and persistent warning, whispered in hushed tones about the perilous consequences of seeking solace or intimacy in the remote, forgotten corners of the county. Elaine Carter herself, though physically rescued, remained a silent testament to the night's horrors, her profound quietude after the event serving only to deepen the mystery surrounding Robert's death. Her averted gaze and refusal to elaborate beyond her initial testimony spoke volumes to those who observed her, suggesting an encounter so terrible it defied verbal articulation, sealing the event in an unspoken realm of terror. As the years advanced, time, which often blunts the sharp edges of human memory and softens the sting of past horrors, instead seemed to sharpen the bridge's sinister renown. The incident of 1953, far from being an isolated anomaly, was merely another link, a tragically familiar one, in a lengthening, unbroken chain of terror. The dark narrative of Axeman's Bridge continued to collect further, equally chilling chapters, each one cementing its identity as a place of profound dread, a site where the fabric of reality seemed to fray. Among these subsequent events, one particular episode stood out for its sheer, uncompromising brutality and its indelible, scarring impact on the collective memory and psyche of the region. This occurred several years later, rooted in the grim confines of the Federal Medical Center for Prisoners in Springfield, a formidable complex of cold stone and unforgiving steel situated on the outskirts of the city. The institution held individuals deemed too dangerous, too psychologically unstable, or too criminally depraved for conventional incarceration, their minds often as fractured as the bars that held them. On a night characterized by a relentless, chilling rain that lashed with furious intensity against the windows of the center and turned the winding dirt roads of the Ozarks into slick, treacherous mud, a prisoner, whose name has since been largely effaced from public record and spoken only in fearful whispers, managed a cunning and violently executed escape. Details of his flight were scant and heavily shrouded in the secrecy of federal reports, never fully disclosed to the public. However, whispers among the local populace, filtering through the sparse official channels, spoke of guards found severely incapacitated, a trail of unsettling disarray within the facility, and a chilling sense of calculated chaos that hinted at a mind utterly unburdened by conventional morality or empathy. His sudden, terrifying disappearance into the rain-swept darkness of the Ozark Hills initiated a widespread and desperate manhunt, its urgency underscored by the exceptionally severe nature of the man's previous offenses, which included unspeakable acts of violence against multiple victims. Fear gripped the surrounding communities, transforming the familiar landscape into a potential hunting ground. The desperate search for the escaped convict ended, tragically and horrifically, at Axeman's Bridge. The morning broke with a heavy mist rising from the creek, but brought no solace. Local farmers, venturing out in the first pale light after the storm had finally passed, their rubber boots sinking into the saturated earth, discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. 2 bodies lay sprawled upon the weathered, rain-slicked planks of the bridge, a young couple, their vehicle abandoned nearby, its doors ajar. The victims, whose identities were quickly confirmed as local residents who had also sought a moment of quiet, illicit solitude on the bridge, had been subjected to a brutal, merciless assault. Their bodies were mutilated beyond immediate recognition, bearing the marks of a savage, frenzied attack that spoke of an inhuman rage. Limbs were twisted at unnatural, grotesque angles, and the fabric of their clothing was shredded, saturated with blood that had been partially washed away by the relentless night's rain, leaving behind only dark, telltale stains on the damp, splintered wood. The air around them hung heavy with the metallic scent of fresh gore, even as the rain continued its mournful drizzle. But the most macabre detail, the one that etched the scene into the darkest corners of local history and public consciousness, concerned their heads. Both heads had been brutally and cleanly severed from their torsos, a task that required immense force and a chilling precision. In a grotesque, almost ritualistic display of calculated savagery, they had been impaled upon the rusty, jagged spikes of the bridge's iron railings, one at each extremity of the span, facing inwards towards the gruesome tableau below. Their vacant eyes, now dull and filmed over with the mist, stared out into the gray, indifferent morning, reflecting only the desolate sky, a silent, horrifying tableau of ultimate defilement and terror. The sight, chilling in its deliberate cruelty and primal ferocity, sent a profound wave of revulsion and terror through the entire county, traumatizing even the most seasoned law enforcement officers. Police reports, meticulously compiled by hardened officers who had witnessed countless acts of violence and degradation throughout their careers, described the scene with an almost clinical detachment in an attempt to process the horror. Yet, even their carefully chosen, dispassionate language could not mask the profound shock and horror. One particular line in a sealed dossier, initially classified but later leaked years later through unofficial, whispered channels, summarized the grim consensus among investigators. It was the most brutal scene ever recorded in the county, a statement that carried immense weight given the region's long, often violent history of hardship and desperate acts. The fugitive, the presumed perpetrator of this unspeakable act, was never officially recaptured, despite extensive search efforts involving state police and federal agents meticulously scouring the dense forests, labyrinthine hollows, and remote caves of the Ozarks for weeks. The man vanished without a trace, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. His fate became another dark, enigmatic thread in the bridge's burgeoning mythology, fueling endless speculation and fear. Some local legends claimed he had drowned in the swollen, churning waters of the creek below, his body carried away by the relentless current, never to be found, a ghost condemned to the watery depths. Others maintained, with a chilling conviction, that he had simply disappeared into the deep, unforgiving, untamed mats of the Ozark wilderness, becoming a spectral presence, a feral phantom forever lurking within the deepest shadows of the ancient woods, a creature more myth than man. Regardless of the elusive truth, his name, rarely spoken aloud but frequently whispered in lowered, fearful tones, began to solidify into a chilling, enduring legend. Each new, unexplained crime, each unsettling disappearance, or bizarre event attributed to Axeman's bridge, seemed to gain an additional, terrifying layer of dread cast by his elusive, malevolent shadow, further blurring the thin, fragile line between human violence and something far more elemental, more ancient, more sinister, a force native to the land itself. Even today, decades after the tragedy of Robert and Elaine, and years following the horrific massacre linked to the escaped prisoner, residents and travelers alike continue to attest to the bridge's pervasive, unsettling influence. For many, Axeman's bridge is not merely a decaying structure of wood and iron, a relic of a bygone era. It is a cicatrice abierta, an open festering. Other drivers report that their vehicles, perfectly functional moments before, inexplicably die precisely as they reach the very middle of the bridge's span. The engines sputter once, cough, then fall into an absolute, chilling silence, plunging the occupants into profound darkness, enveloped by the mournful creaking of the timbers and the barely audible murmur of the creek below. All attempts to restart the car, to coax life back into the dead engine prove utterly futile, the key turning uselessly in the ignition. Only after an agonizing, unexplained period of stillness, or once the vehicle is physically pushed off the bridge and onto solid ground, does the engine roar back to life without any discernible cause for its prior failure. These mechanical failures are often accompanied by a sudden, drastic drop in temperature inside the car, a preternatural cold that seems to seep into the very bones, chilling the occupants to the core. More disturbing still are the visual accounts, persistent and unsettling. There are those who swear they have glimpsed a dark, indistinct silhouette, a shadowy form, suspended unnaturally from the gnarled, ancient branches of the very oak tree that majestically and menacingly overhangs the creek, its form swaying slowly, rhythmically against the pale, ethereal glow of the moon or the impenetrable mist that often clings to the hollows. The image, spectral and horrifying, is a direct, chilling echo of Robert Miller's gruesome fate in 1953, a visual haunting that refuses to be forgotten, a loop of terror playing out across the decades. And perhaps most unsettling of all, a phenomenon reported by multiple, entirely unrelated witnesses over many years, is the distinct, metallic, coppery scent of blood that sometimes permeates the air when crossing the bridge in the dead of night, particularly when a heavy fog or dense mist descends upon the creek. This phantom odor, sharp and visceral, is often described as impossible to ignore, a tangible presence in the atmosphere, detected even when there is no visible source, no accident, nothing but the swirling vapor and the oppressive silence of the Ozark night. It is a spectral reek that speaks of violence and unanswered questions, a perpetual, chilling reminder that the horrors of Axeman's Bridge are not confined to the distant past, but linger, ever present, in the very fabric of the air, eternally awaiting new witnesses to its ancient, unholy secrets. The bridge remains, a haunted sentinel, continuously feeding the chilling lore of the Ozarks, its story far from over. The shadow of Axeman's Bridge continues to stretch, its ancient timbers and rust-eaten iron rails standing as grim testaments to lingering horrors. Robert Miller's fate, sealed by an unknown force that defied scientific explanation, became but one indelible chapter in a history marked by inexplicable violence. The subsequent, grotesque massacre linked to the elusive federal prisoner only solidified the bridge's malevolent reputation, further weaving its dark lore into the very fabric of the Ozark Hills. The silent witnesses, the trees, the creek, the unchanging landscape hold secrets the official reports could never capture. Perhaps some places, like Axeman's Bridge, do not merely exist as physical structures, but rather as living scars upon the earth. They absorb the fear, the blood, and the unanswered questions, becoming conduits for a terror that transcends time. It suggests that some tragedies are not merely events that pass, but entities that persist, perpetually waiting, eternally vigilant. The true horror, then, lies not only in what occurred on those creaking planks, but in the unsettling truth that the unknown, the unclassified, the unspeakable, remains. The coroner's report on Robert Miller left more questions than answers, a stark admission of incomprehension. What do you believe truly happened on Axeman's Bridge that night in 1953? Share your theories and any local legends you've encountered in the comments below. If these dark whispers from the Ozarks stir your spirit, delve deeper into the forgotten corners of history with our next investigation into the unexplained. Until then, consider subscribing to Ashen Tongues and liking this video to ensure you don't miss another descent into the shadows of our world.